All right, welcome to OHRPP's Learn at Lunch. We're going to talk about coordinating your IRB review with the review from other research oversight bodies. And I had called it committees, but there's a little bit of like wiggle room there. So we'll just be more general and call them bodies. All right, and I'm going to start off with the first one, which unfortunately I don't have a link to. I assume that it's pretty easy to find if you are behind the UCLA Health firewall. I am not, I'm a campus person, so I can't hunt through the web pages in UCLA Health. But you should be able to find this pretty easily. And UCLA Clinical Engineering is the body that will test out equipment that will be used under the hospital's license. So if you're doing a clinical trial of a device, you would need to run the device past them in order for it to be approved, to be able to be used in your research. So reach out to them. I'm sure you'll find them no problem. And that's one of the bodies that you should talk to. Um, other than the IRB for your research. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. We're growing and changing this, and we'll be updating this presentation the more things come to light about other parts of the research enterprise at UCLA. The next one I want to talk about is the Conflict of Interest and Review Committee, or CIRC. And what it is an independent faculty body that advises the Vice Chancellor for Research and Creative Activities. And they review investigator financial conflicts of interest to determine whether there is a real or perceived conflict of interest that may be present and to recommend ways to manage such conflicts. So what happens is the PI needs to submit required changes via Bruin IRB after the CIRC review. So optimally, it should be conducted prior to or in parallel with the IRB review. CIRC and the IRBs coordinate their reviews as best as we can to ensure that potential conflicts of interest are managed appropriately. So if there's a management plan which says so-and-so cannot be the PI, we need to make sure that we don't approve a study with so-and-so as the PI, that sort of thing. Right, and let's continue on. The Human Pluripotent Stem Cell Research Oversight Committee was created at UCLA, and it's a function of California law to oversee human research involving human pluripotent stem cells, including human embryonic stem cells and induced pluripotent stem cells. Now, a lot of what they review is not going to be human subjects research, but occasionally there will be an overlap between their committee's mandate and ours. So what they'll do is review new protocols, they'll review modifications to currently approved research, and continuing research using human pluripotent stem cells. And any covered cells as required by state or federal law. So if you think your research might fall under that category, please reach out to them. There's a link in the slide, and find out what their requirements are and what their scope is in a more detailed fashion. And again, this should be conducted in parallel or prior to IRB review. All right. The next one that we want to talk about is the Institutional Biosafety Committee, or IBC. And like the last committee with stem cells, this one has a lot of studies that are not human subjects research, but there is a little bit of overlap in the Venn diagram of human subjects research that the IRB reviews and research that the IBC reviews. So for that sliver, we need to make sure that the IBC review is conducted either in parallel or prior to IRB review. So what they do is they review and approve uses of recombinant DNA that are listed as covered experiments in the NIH guidelines. So they have a federal mandate for their work, just as we do. They also review and approve the use of risk group 2 or 3 infectious agents. They require review at initial review, and it's required for all human stem cell research when investigators purposely place agents such as vectors or recombinant DNA or pathogens into cells, or when cellular material is put into human subjects, such as a clinical trial with vector agents. So if you think this might be your research and you're not familiar with IBC, please take a look at their website and get more detail. All right, now we're getting into the ISPRC, which is part of the Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center, and they are the Internal Scientific Peer Review Committee. And they review research that is under their purview, which is cancer research. And they do review, and they have lots of more information on their website. We require documentation of ISPRC approval for any new submissions and changes to the protocol for UCLA developed investigator-initiated therapeutic and diagnostic cancer trials. So investigator-initiated trials, you need to get ISPRC approval for the study initially and as the study changes. So every time the protocol for investigator-initiated therapeutic or diagnostic cancer trial occurs, you need to go to ISPRC and you would need to give their approval to the IRB either for initial or amendment submission. The IRB will generally hold IRB approval for documentation of ISPRC approval when it's required. So we don't need documentation, just as an aside, for continuing review, industry-sponsored clinical trials, investigator-initiated protocols developed by non-UCLA investigators in a consortium, for instance, amendments that do not impact the protocol. So we don't need ISPRC approval for change in study coordinator, consent form tweaks that aren't substantive, and that kind of things. All right, so that's the ISPRC. Then there's the SRC, which is the Scientific Review Committee that reviews a subset of human subjects research under UCLA Policy 916. So as you can imagine, their purview is not cancer-related, since there's the ISPRC for cancer-related studies, but also their purview includes studies that have not undergone independent scientific review. So if you have undergone independent scientific review, make sure you indicate that in your application to the IRB, because then it will get automatically triggered to go to the SRC. And also, they don't review gene therapy related trials. And so their scope is basically if you are a principal investigator within the health sciences, medicine, nursing, or dentistry, or you're a UCLA PI from any department that's going to be using UCLA Health patients, resources, or services for your clinical trial, then it will need to go to the SRC, your research. Now, in instances where the SRC review is required, Bruin IRB system, when you hit submit to IRB, it will actually divert the application at that time, and it'll go to SRC for review first. Once the scientific review committee is done, they'll send it along to the OHRPP, which will then assign it to a committee, et cetera, et cetera. So do know that it's important for you to be responsive to whatever the SRC is asking, because until you resolve the SRC issues, it won't get to the IRB for IRB review. HDOC, which is the UCLA Health Data Oversight Committee. And what they do is they oversee releases of health data, and that includes both clinical data, or otherwise known as PHI, and research health data. So health data collected as part of a research protocol to third parties. So there is a web page with information about HDOC, and the review for HDOC could happen really at any time relative to IRB review. It might happen before IRB review if the release to third parties is part of the contract for a trial. It may happen long after the study is reviewed by the IRB if it's the release to the third party might happen due to a newly developed secondary analysis that an external party is going to be conducting. So it's really important to reach out to them if there's release to a third party of health data, as they define it, as soon as you know that might be happening. Very excitingly, and great timing for anyone who wants to know more about HDOC, is that UCLA TDG is offering a training seminar tomorrow on the HDOC data use agreement. So this is the data use agreement for sending health data out of UCLA. So I would just say Google HDOC data use agreements, UCLA TDG, and you can get the link before I get the slides out, which might not be in time. But do check that out because you'll get a lot of good information from them. As I mentioned before, this is really just an overview of some other committees at UCLA and elsewhere that may have impact with your research. And you should definitely reach out to each of these committees or entities directly for more detail on what their review process is. The next one we're going to talk about is the Medical Radiation Safety Committee and Radioactive Drug Research Committee. And they're responsible for the evaluation of all research protocols that involve the use of radioactive materials and radiation-producing machines intended for human use at UCLA in compliance with California regulations. The RDRC review is required for research involving the administration of radioactive drugs to human research subjects during the course of a research project intended to obtain basic research information regarding the metabolism of radioactivity, labeled drug, or regarding human physiology. So both of their reviews are they require a review at initial review, and any time there's a change in the dose of radiation or radioactive drug. And we, the IRB, will hold IRB approval for the documentation of the MRSC or RDRC approvals, because we want to make sure that if they have particular language they need in the consent form to describe the risk from the radiation exposure, that is implemented before the study is approved. All right, next one is EH&S has a controlled substance program. And what they do is they help to administer DEA registration. They liaise with external regulatory agencies. They help when there's a controlled substance that's being used as part of the research, whether it's human or animal. And again, this is a Venn diagram, not a full overlapping circle. But for human subjects research, they would be the people to talk to if you're going to be using controlled substances in your research. And will refer researchers using controlled substances to coordinate with program coordinators, but we don't require any approvals for the IRB. We just simply need you to know that they exist and to work with them on making sure that your controlled substance is properly stored and managed, etc. All right, and the very last one is not actually a UCLA oversight entity. It is the state of California's Research Advisory Panel, also known as RAPC. And the state of California mandates the review and approval of all research that involves Schedule I controlled substance, Schedule II controlled substances, and all researches for the treatment of drug abuse that's utilizing any drug, scheduled or not. And so what this means is you would need to submit to them after you get IRB approval, because they require the IRB approval in order to do their process. So they need to know the study is viable from the IRB's perspective before they do their review. And in the past, there's been some holdups with their review process. They actually halted reviewing for a while, but I hear now that they're back in business and they're doing a lot of reviews via their expedited process. So hopefully if this relates to the research that you work on, you won't have a huge holdup from RAPC. But if you ever do encounter such a problem, please make sure that you reach out to us, let us know that you're finding some bumps in the road, and we'll talk to our various advocates in the UC system who can maybe help unstick the process. So that is RAPC. Any questions? We've got policies and guidance on when you need to go where. So take a look at that website. And it's always great to look at our policies and guidance websites. There's a wealth of information. A lot of your questions can be answered there. And let me see. And there's my contact information. So I have a few little additional things that Allison and Mark put in the chat. Oh, great. Thank you, Allison. She put the link to register for the TDG seminar on HDOC, which is happening tomorrow. So please take a look at that. And Mark is telling us that we only need the ISPRC notices for initial approval for investigator-initiated studies where ISPRC serves as the DSMB, not for amendments or CRs. So thank you, Mark, for that clarification. I'll update the slides before I send them out. And that is the presentation for today. There's a quickie. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have. If there are additional entities that you have encountered in your attempt to get your study up and running, please let me know, and we will expand our presentation for the next time to incorporate those offices as well. So any questions? Everyone's shy. If you're shy, you can put your question in the chat. You don't have to unmute and do it that way. All right. Last chance. Well, thank you all for attending. I do hope that if you're interested in more information about HDOC that you register for the TDG session. And thank you so much. And we will see you at the next one.